Before Rockefeller built his oil empire, before J.P. Morgan ruled Wall Street, there was one man who taught America how to get rich. A poor boy from Staten Island who started with a single boat and ended with $100 billion fortune. His name was Cornelius Vanderbilt, and he didn't just chase wealth, he invented it. Before Rockefeller built his oil empire, before J.P. Morgan ruled Wall Street, there was one man who taught America how to get rich. A poor, stubborn boy from Staten Island who started with nothing but a rowboat and turned it into a $100 billion empire. His name was Cornelius Vanderbilt, and he didn't just chase wealth, he defined it. The world knew him by another name, the Commodore. The year was 1794. America was still a fragile experiment, a young nation full of hunger and uncertainty. There were no skyscrapers, no stock markets, no dynasties yet, only muddy docks, restless sailors, and the promise of freedom. On the edge of Staten Island, an 11-year-old boy stared across the harbor. He watched ships glide toward Manhattan, carrying goods, people, and fortunes. That water wasn't just a horizon, it was an invitation. By 16, Cornelius borrowed $100 from his mother and bought a small sailboat. It was a simple wooden vessel, but to him it was a declaration of war against poverty. He began ferrying passengers and cargo between Staten Island and Manhattan, pushing himself harder than any man on the river. When the wind died, he rowed. When rivals blocked his path, he outraced them. He wasn't chasing a living, he was carving out power. New Yorkers soon learned his rhythm. He was loud, fast, relentless. He shouted from the docks, bargained like a street fighter, and worked till his hands bled. People began to notice something rare in him, a mix of raw ambition and a refusal to lose. While others prayed for fair winds, Vanderbilt made his own. By his 20s, he had already earned a reputation that hovered between admiration and fear. Competitors called him reckless. Partners called him unstoppable. He understood that business wasn't a game of kindness. It was a battlefield of nerves. He didn't care about being liked. He wanted to be obeyed. In his mind, fear was respect, and respect was currency. Then came the steamboat revolution. Massive, loud, and powerful, these engines of smoke and iron promised to change everything. Vanderbilt saw what others missed, that the future would belong to whoever could control the flow of movement. He joined Thomas Gibbons, a fierce entrepreneur, and together they challenged the government-backed monopoly that ruled New York's waterways. Their fight was brutal. Vanderbilt ran ships through forbidden routes, dodged patrols, and cut fares so low his rivals drowned in debt. The press called him a pirate, a madman, even a criminal. He wore those words like medals. Every voyage he made under threat became a lesson in dominance. When their case, Gibbons versus Ogden, reached the Supreme Court in 1824, it shattered the monopoly and rewrote the rules of American commerce. Vanderbilt, the once poor boatman, had forced open the gates of free trade. They called him the Commodore now, half man, half machine. He crushed competitors, bribed politicians, and commanded fleets as if they were armies. In the rough chaos of a growing America, he discovered the truth that would guide him forever. Mercy doesn't build empires. With the rivers conquered, his vision shifted to land. Railroads, the new veins of the continent, were rising from the mud. Vanderbilt sold his steamboats and threw every dollar into iron and steel. People mocked him. They said trains were risky, the industry unstable. But he saw farther. Railroads weren't just transport. They were control over time itself. Within years, he controlled lines stretching from New York to Chicago. He united them into one vast system and created a transportation empire unlike anything the world had seen. As cities grew and industries exploded, his fortune multiplied. Newspapers described him as both a genius and a tyrant. Workers cursed him. Investors worshipped him. He became the symbol of America's ruthless drive to grow, no matter the cost. His name alone could move markets, but the more he gained, the more he distrusted everyone. He saw betrayal in every handshake. He kept his books hidden, his plans secret, his power centralized in his own hands. He treated his family as subordinates, testing their loyalty, mocking their weakness. He believed no one could run his empire but himself, and he was probably right. By his 70s, Vanderbilt was one of the richest men in human history. Adjusted for today, his wealth would exceed $100 billion. Yet he worked like a man, still trying to escape poverty. His body weakened, but his will stayed iron. He drove himself because he feared something greater than failure. He feared irrelevance. Behind the marble walls of his mansion, luxury surrounded him, but peace never did. He saw his children grow soft. He saw society turn his name from a symbol of victory into a symbol of arrogance. The Commodore who had commanded rivers and rails could not command his own bloodline. He often said, "What do I care about the law? Ain't I got the power?" But in his final years, that power turned hollow. Money could buy land, fleets, even nations, but not loyalty, not legacy, not love. He had built a machine so vast it could move a country, yet he could not pass on the fire that created it. Cornelius Vanderbilt died in 1877, leaving behind the largest private fortune the world had ever seen. But in that same moment, the seeds of his empire's destruction were already alive, in the hearts of his heirs, who would inherit everything except his hunger. Empires built on rage and risk can't last forever. The storm was coming, and even the Commodore could not command it. He had conquered the world outside, but inside his family the future was slipping away. The age of the builder was ending, and the age of the heirs was about to begin. When Cornelius Vanderbilt died in 1877, the world bowed its head to a legend. The man who had started with a single sailboat left behind a fortune larger than the U.S. Treasury itself. Yet in his mansion, as the candles flickered beside his coffin, a darker story was just beginning. His sons and daughters stood in silence, not just mourning their father, but measuring what they had gained. They didn't just inherit his fortune, they inherited his shadow. The world expected the Vanderbilts to become a dynasty, a royal house of American wealth that would last for centuries. And at first, it looked as though that prophecy would come true. William Henry Vanderbilt, Cornelius's favorite son, took the empire in his hands. And like his father, he was not a fighter. He was quiet, methodical, and cautious, a banker's soul in a titan's seat. But he understood what his father had built, and he understood how fragile power truly was. In just 8 years, William doubled the family fortune. The Commodore had left him about $100 million. By the time William died, it was $200 million, around $6 billion today. For a brief moment, it seemed the empire had found its new captain. But with William's death in 1885, the empire was divided among his children, splintering into branches that would never again move as one. Each Vanderbilt heir inherited more money than they could ever spend. Fifth Avenue filled with their mansions. Marble, gold, chandeliers, imported ceilings from Italian palaces. Their homes were not just houses, they were statements of supremacy. They weren't competing against America anymore. They were competing against each other. New York's elite called this new age the Gilded Age, a time when everything glittered, but not everything was gold. The Vanderbilts built palaces that rose like monuments to excess. William Kissam Vanderbilt's mansion stood like a cathedral of ego. Cornelius II's house at First West 57th Street had ceilings so high they disappeared into shadow. Elva Vanderbilt, the ambitious and cunning wife of William Kissam, would later build her own masterpiece, the Marble House in Newport, Rhode Island, a palace so grand it stunned even European aristocrats. But behind the glittering walls and diamond-lit banquets, something was rotting. The Vanderbilts were rich in money and poor in purpose. They had inherited an empire, but not the fire that forged it. Cornelius Vanderbilt had built his fortune through war and hunger. His heirs built theirs through inheritance and pride. They were trained to spend, not to create. The social wars of New York were vicious. The old money families, the Astors, the Livingstons, the Schuylers, looked down on the Vanderbilts as new money, uncultured and vulgar. Elva Vanderbilt decided to destroy that barrier with a single event, the most extravagant ball New York had ever seen. In 1883, she invited over 1,000 of New York's elite to her Fifth Avenue mansion. Guests arrived in diamonds, feathers, and velvet. Champagne flowed like water. Musicians played through the night as servants ran through halls of gold leaf and marble. The ball cost over $250,000, a fortune even then. But it worked. The next morning, the newspapers had a new headline. "The Vanderbilts have conquered society." For the first time, the family's name was not mocked, it was revered. But the victory came with a curse. From that night forward, the Vanderbilts became addicted to image. They built castles to prove worth, not to create value. They mistook attention for respect. As the generations passed, the family's energy drifted from industry to indulgence. Sons became playboys, daughters became socialites, and the family meetings that once discussed business now revolved around parties, jewels, and marriages. Every generation grew softer. They spent millions on yachts, horses, and mansions. They measured each other by the size. William Kissam Vanderbilt once said, "Any fool can make a fortune. It takes a man of brains to hold on to it," but even he couldn't hold it for long. His children began selling off shares of the family railroad to fund their lifestyles. Slowly, quietly, piece by piece, the empire began to shrink. The fifth generation of Vanderbilts didn't even know how their wealth had been built. They knew horses, yachts, and operas, but not business, not sacrifice, not the cold discipline of competition that had made their name feared. And then came the press. America was no longer fascinated by wealth, it was angry at it. The public saw the Vanderbilts' marble mansions as symbols of greed in a nation where millions lived in poverty. The same name that once meant greatness now meant arrogance. Still, the family tried to hold on. They threw larger balls, built bigger houses, and flaunted their lifestyle. But the world was turning faster than their empire could move. New industries were rising. New names were taking over. The Vanderbilts were no longer America's power. They were its spectacle. They had conquered society, but they had lost their soul. The money that once represented vision now represented vanity. And the more they tried to hold on to their glory, the faster it slipped away. By the dawn of the 20th century, the Vanderbilt empire looked untouchable from the outside, but within the family, it was cracking. The heirs were drowning in luxury and debt. The once great fortune was bleeding away, feeding an endless hunger for recognition. They no longer wanted to be powerful. They wanted to be seen. By the dawn of the 20th century, the Vanderbilt name meant elegance, opulence, and authority. They were the American royal family, the rulers of railroads, the hosts of high society, the embodiment of inherited power. But behind their shining walls of marble and gold, a slow decay had already begun. The empire that once built America's future was now sinking under the weight of its own past. The world had changed. Steel, oil, and electricity were reshaping the nation. Rockefeller controlled the oil that powered its factories. J.P. Morgan financed its industries. Henry Ford would soon make cars for the common man, changing how people moved forever. But the Vanderbilts were trapped in another century, an age of palaces, pearls, and powdered prestige. Their empire was built on railroads, but the railroads were losing their throne. Automobiles, airplanes, and highways were the new arteries of progress. As profits slipped, the Vanderbilts clung to appearances. They built even larger mansions, threw grander parties, and filled their days with racing yachts and European vacations. The Commodore's hunger for domination had been replaced by a hunger for luxury. Cornelius Vanderbilt II, the grandson of the Commodore, became the head of the family's vast fortune. He was intelligent, ambitious, and proud, but even he could not stop the erosion. His mansion on Fifth Avenue was the largest private home ever built in New York City. It had over 100 rooms, ballrooms glittering with gold, staircases carved from Italian marble, and ceilings painted like cathedrals. To the outside world, it looked like a palace fit for a king. Inside, it was a fortress built to defend a fading empire. When Cornelius II died in 1899, the fortune passed to his children. One of them, Alfred Gwynne Vanderbilt, was the perfect symbol of the new generation, handsome, charming, but careless. He spent millions on thoroughbred horses, summer estates, and private clubs. To the newspapers, he was the image of wealth without weight. In 1915, Alfred boarded the RMS Lusitania, a luxury liner bound for England. When a German submarine torpedoed the ship off the coast of Ireland, he refused to save himself. He gave his life jacket to a young mother and child. The ship sank within minutes. Alfred Vanderbilt died a hero, but also a symbol of a dying age, the nobility of wealth consumed by the modern world's violence. After Alfred's death, the decline accelerated. The railroad empire was breaking apart. New laws restricted monopolies. New technologies made the old industries obsolete. Yet the family refused to change course. They spent fortunes maintaining homes that stood empty most of the year. Newport's Marble House, the Breakers, Biltmore, and dozens more. Biltmore, built by George Washington Vanderbilt, was the largest home in America, 250 rooms, 65 fireplaces, miles of gardens. It was a monument to beauty, craftsmanship, and vision. But it was also the final monument of the Vanderbilt dream. George died young, leaving behind debts so immense that the family had to sell off land just to survive. By the 1920s, America's mood had shifted. The Jazz Age celebrated speed, rebellion, and freedom. The Vanderbilts represented everything the New World wanted to escape. They were no longer innovators, they were relics. Their palaces became museum pieces while the real power moved to Wall Street. The Great Depression delivered the final blow. Trains sat idle. Stock prices collapsed. The fortune that had once controlled the arteries of America was now bleeding out. Mansions were shuttered, estates were sold, and servants were dismissed. By the 1940s, most of the Vanderbilt homes along Fifth Avenue had been demolished. The land where they once ruled became office towers and department stores. The heirs scattered. Some lived quietly on what remained. Others married into European nobility or moved to Hollywood. Gloria Vanderbilt became an icon of fashion and art in the mid-20th century. Her life both glamorous and tragic. Her son, Anderson Cooper, would later become one of America's most respected journalists, a man who often spoke of his family's fortune not as privilege, but as history's warning. The Vanderbilt name never disappeared, but the fortune did. Within a few generations, the empire that had once controlled railroads, steamships, and cities was gone. At the family reunion in 1973, held at Vanderbilt University, not a single descendant was a millionaire. The empire had vanished, consumed by extravagance, division, and time. Their castles still stand. Marble House glows under the Rhode Island sun. The Breakers still looks out toward the Atlantic like a sleeping giant. Biltmore still welcomes visitors to walk its endless halls. But they are no longer homes, they are museums. Symbols of how power fades, how wealth without wisdom evaporates, how legacy becomes legend. The Vanderbilt story is not just about money. It is about the fragile nature of ambition itself. Cornelius Vanderbilt built an empire out of nothing because he believed the world owed him nothing. His heirs lost it because they believed the world owed them everything. In the end, the fall of the Vanderbilts is not a tragedy of economics, it is a tragedy of spirit. They mistook inheritance for identity, luxury for legacy, and comfort for power. They forgot that every fortune, no matter how vast, is only rented from time. Their castles turned to museums. Their fortune turned to dust. But their story still whispers through the halls of American history. It warns every generation that no matter how high you rise, no matter how strong your empire, wealth alone will never outlast purpose. Long after the last Vanderbilt mansion on Fifth Avenue was torn down, the echo of hammers striking marble still seemed to ring through New York. The empire was gone, but its shadow stretched over the city it had once ruled. Streets once lined with Vanderbilt palaces now glittered with glass towers. Trains still thundered along tracks first laid under their name. The fortune had vanished, yet the infrastructure of their dream remained woven into America's bones. Time had stripped the Vanderbilt family of its crowns, but not of its myth. To historians, they became a parable of capitalism's rise. To dreamers, a warning of how power decays when it stops creating. Every generation rediscovers them and asks the same question: how does a family worth $100 billion lose everything? The answer is not only in the numbers, it lies in the changing heartbeat of a nation. When Cornelius Vanderbilt built his empire, America rewarded aggression and invention. Wealth was proof of will. By the 20th century, the nation worshipped new gods: technology, celebrity, innovation. The Vanderbilts, frozen in marble and etiquette, had no place in this faster, leaner world, yet pieces of them endure everywhere. The rail lines that connected New York, Chicago, and the South, many still trace routes the Commodore once mapped. Vanderbilt University in Tennessee still carries his name, its motto promising discipline and freedom. Biltmore still stands as both wonder and warning, a place where ambition met art. The family's later generations scattered into quieter pursuits. Some became writers, artists, or philanthropists. Others vanished into anonymity, their surnames diluted by marriage and time. And yet, every so often, a headline would remind America that the bloodline still existed, no longer rulers of rails, but storytellers, journalists, and designers shaping culture in subtler ways. Gloria Vanderbilt became the unexpected bridge between the Gilded Age and modern America. Born into scandal, raised in courtrooms and gossip columns, she reinvented herself again and again as painter, designer, and mother. Her jeans line in the 1970s placed the family crest not on a mansion gate, but on denim sold in every department store. For the first time in nearly a century, a Vanderbilt product was once again in the hands of the public. She proved that reinvention, not inheritance, was the true legacy of her line. Her son, Anderson Cooper, would later speak of that inheritance with both pride and distance. He said his mother taught him that money could buy freedom, but it could never buy purpose. When Gloria died in 2019, she left him little fortune, but a vast story. A reminder that walk through the Biltmore estate today, and you can still feel it. The echo of grandeur, the emptiness of space, built too large for the people who remained. Sunlight spills across the grand staircase. Dust floats like memory. The paintings of forgotten ancestors watch silently as tourists pass beneath them. Every creak of the floorboards seems to whisper the same truth. The higher you build, without purpose, the farther you fall. Yet there is beauty in what they left behind. Their architects shaped the skyline. Their philanthropy seeded universities and art museums. Their restless desire to expand helped to knit together a fractured young nation. The Commodore's brutality built the tracks that would one day carry millions of lives toward their own destinies. Even in their failure, the Vanderbilts moved the world forward. And perhaps that is their final redemption. Every dynasty falls. Every fortune fades. But the energy that created them, the daring, the hunger, the refusal to accept limits, never dies. It transfers. It becomes the fuel of new builders, new dreamers, new generations who start again with nothing but an idea and the will to fight for it. In the end, the Vanderbilt saga is not just the story of one family's collapse. It is the story of America itself. The rise from poverty, the intoxication of success, the blindness of excess, and the eternal search for meaning after the money is gone. Cornelius Vanderbilt once said, "What do I care about the law? Ain't I got the power?" History answered him. Power fades. What endures is legacy, the invisible thread that ties ambition to consequence. Stand on a New York platform as a train roars past, and somewhere in that thunder you can still hear him. The boy who rode across a harbor and decided to change the world. His descendants may have lost the empire, but the rhythm of his will beats on in every journey that begins, every risk that is taken, every dream that refuses to die. The Vanderbilt fortune is gone, but their story is immortal. It is carved not in marble, but in motion, in the ceaseless drive of humanity to build, to rise, and to begin again from nothing. Their empire vanished, but their lesson endures. Wealth is temporary. Creation is eternal. When the dust of the Gilded Age settled and the marble of Fifth Avenue crumbled into memory, what remained of the Vanderbilts was not wealth, but warning. Their name, once spoken with reverence and fear, now lingers in history books like an echo of both brilliance and blindness. The empire that rose from steam and steel ended not with an explosion, but with silence. It's easy to see their story as tragedy, a family that built the arteries of America and then bled out in the luxury they created. But the deeper truth is more human, more timeless. The Vanderbilts are not just the story of a family's fall. They are the mirror of every generation that forgets how fragile power is when it is not anchored to purpose. Cornelius Vanderbilt began with nothing but raw will. He was the embodiment of motion, ruthless, restless, unbreakable. He didn't build an empire for comfort. He built it to prove he could. His blood pulsed with a hunger that refused limitation. That hunger transformed rivers into highways and turned steel into destiny. Yet within 2 generations, that hunger had turned into habit. The empire that once symbolized drive became a monument to indulgence. This is how legacies die, not with defeat, but with ease. The second generation inherits the crown, but not the scars. They enjoy the fruit, but forget the roots. They learn to spend what they did not earn, to protect what they did not build. Wealth left unguarded by work erodes from within. The Vanderbilt dynasty became a living parable of that truth, a kingdom that collapsed not because the world changed, but because its heirs stopped changing with it. By the time the last mansion was sold and the last trust fund emptied, America had already moved on. The new titans were not railroad barons, but innovators, builders of dreams made from light and code. The Vanderbilts, once the face of the future, became relics of a past too heavy to carry forward. Their story reminds us that progress does not pause for pride. The world forgets even its kings when they cease to create, and yet there is beauty in their fall. Because through their rise and ruin, the Vanderbilts revealed the cycle that defines all human ambition. The climb, the peak, the decline, and the rebirth through lessons left behind. Their name became a symbol not just of opulence, but of the cost of losing vision. Their railroads taught us how to connect. Their collapse taught us how to stay grounded. The real empire they built was never in gold or granite. It was in the daring to dream. Every skyscraper that pierces the sky, every entrepreneur who begins with nothing carries a spark of that same audacity. The Vanderbilt story whispers to each of us that success is a living thing. It must be fed by purpose, disciplined by humility, and renewed by creation. So when you walk through the remnants of their world, the Biltmore halls, the rail lines, the quiet portraits of faces long forgotten, you are not looking at failure. You are looking at proof. Proof that fortune without vision is dust. Proof that legacy without passion is noise. Proof that no amount of inheritance can replace the fire that begins in one determined heart. The $100 billion empire may have vanished, but the spirit that built it remains alive in every soul, willing to begin again from zero. That is the paradox of the Vanderbilts. They lost everything, yet they left behind a lesson more valuable than all they owned. The fall of their house was not the end of their influence. It was its awakening. Because long after their mansions are gone, the question they leave behind still burns in the heart of every dreamer who dares to rise.